one time I thought it was the worst place a kid could go. And then I thought it was the best place. A little white school sitting on top of the hill. And I loved it.
Those teachers instilled in us a desire to succeed. It wasn't a matter of what you could do, it's just what you would do. We've always known that we were somebody. Jesse Jackson did not coin that phrase. That phrase came out of Summerhill School.
You do the best you can. You rise up as fast as you can to overcome some of the circumstances that may confront you. It takes work. It takes determination. Sometimes it takes patience. It can send you upward if you let it.
It goes deep in our hearts. It goes deep in our heart, and it runs in our veins. And I think you can pretty well tell a student that came through the doors of Summerhill High School.
Have you seen a bowl of cotton? Okay, you have to put your fingers down in there and pull the cotton out of that bowl, and it would, just skin your fingers all up.
You got about a 6-foot drag sack you're pulling, and you go from one end of the field to the other. It could be a half a mile one way.
Living on a farm, and you don't have no heat in the house, and you can look up there a lot of time and see the stars, cracks in the floor. It's real cold in the house.
It wasn't easy, but we would always seem to find a little joy in everything we did. We'd find a little joy in it, and that made it better, And we'd always pray for a better day.
At that time, there were no hotels for blacks. They had a lot of black men coming in to do different work, so they had to have a place to stay. So my grandmother also took in boarders, and she would prepare their breakfast, and then she would fix them a lunch, and when they came in, that she would have supper. So she worked 7 days a week, plus doing washing and ironing, so she worked constantly.
I said I was going to school, I was going to be somebody, and I meant that. So I didn't mind coming to Summerhill in the cold and the rain. And of course that trestle out there, sometimes the water would be up to the trestle.
I loved school. It was just like I had to learn, I wanted to learn. But I was handicapped because I was a farm girl. And our lives depended upon working on the farm, because that's where our income, everything came from the farm. But I hated it. I grew up, and I sometimes now think I shouldn't have hated it because it was a decent living. The only reason I did hate it was because it kept me from going to school every day.
We were housed in a wood frame building that was a standard school at that time. And it was located at the top of this hill where the Aubrey Street Gym is now.
Professor Morgan was a wonderful fellow. He had law and order up there. When we got there, rain or shine, we had to stand outside until the bell rang, and he'd come out and stand on the porch, and everybody had to line up. And then his wife used to play the marching song, so did Miss Anderson. Then we march in, Some go to the left and some to the right.
Professor Morgan to me, it was like I was a big daddy. Every Friday morning, we'd have an assembly in the auditorium, and he'd get up there on the podium, and he would just tell us things about life and what we had to do and what we had to become and how we had to act and what was down the road for us, you see.
Well, my first grade teacher was Miss Beatrice Morgan, and that was the first of the kind I really had with anybody outside the family. And I thought she was the sweetest person in the world.
She was a lady, and she presented herself so well every day. I would just admire her because she walked upright, and she had this little stroll, and she talked clearly, and she taught us to do that. She'd always say, that tongue is lazy, and it has no business being lazy. Use that tongue. People don't know what you're saying when you're trying to gnaw on words.
We had a good many teachers who were very firm, and they demanded the best that we could do. The teachers demanded that you learn and respect. We learn those things that mean a lot to getting it along in life. I can remember Miss Bessie Shell. You had to know your tables, you know. You had to recite. She would give you a specific thing to recite, and if you didn't recite, she told you and I used to say, I'm gonna beat Miss Bessie up when I get grown, you know, because she would spank you if you didn't do your lesson correct.
See, back in those days, them teachers make you study, and they'd whoop you if you didn't. You had to do it or else. But they kept the switches in there. A lot of times they send you out to get switches, you know. Sometimes those boys bring in switches big as that thing now, you know.
You can achieve, you had to have bulldog tenacity. And even in my young age, I remember that those were the values that were instilled in each and every one of us. You can do it, there's no excuse, you will do it, we will help you do it. And that was just the attitude of everybody here.
I couldn't do any English at all, period. And when I got to, I think it was probably the 8th or 9th grade, I started taking Latin. And when I could understand Latin, it seemed like my English got better. I could understand how to conjugate verbs and everything with Latin.
I can just hear Mrs. Nancy Beasley saying that so vividly to us in our classes. You must stand up straight. You must sit up proper. You must open your mouth and pronounce your words properly. You must keep eye contact. You must make a statement in the very beginning, and when you leave a positive impression upon that individual that you have had contact with.
Nancy Beasley had me reading what at the time I thought were really weird books like Moby Dick, The Scarlet Letter, which I now know are classics and everybody should read those. We had Black history before Black history was a subject. We just were exposed to good literature and were required to read it.
We had the French club and the students would go to French gatherings, and we had the science club and the math club.
The chorus, we all had to sing, and we thought we was something. As I remember, we went to Fisk in Nashville one year, and you know, that was just something else. A little old school in Cartersville, Georgia, to go to a place like that.
We just had good times. We all were poor, but you didn't think you were poor because everybody was the same. We walked to the prom in our long dresses and the guys in their dark suits. It was very few of us had cars at that time. So we walked to the prom, and it was just everybody walking together.
We couldn't buy a lot of things, but we made our decorations. And there would be a certain amount of time set aside during the day that we would start preparing decorations. And really, once we finished, you would think you were at a ballroom.
Our football games looked like everybody in college just showed up. And we wanted to do our best and show our best, and it meant a lot to us.
They finally got a band, and this was the greatest thing that ever happened. We would have great parades downtown for homecoming.
Even though we didn't have, you know, a lot of up-to-date instruments and everything, but what we had, we took care of those things, and we just, you know, we took them and we cared for them as if we had something that came from a great orchestra. And I think we sounded very well too, because when we would march off these grounds and marched to the football field, everybody knew that the Summerhill Blue Devils were on their way.
We went to Savannah where we got a superior score for our performances, and that led me on to go to college and major in music.
My goodness, it's unbelievable. It was a key game with your next door neighbors like Rome, Calhoun, Dalton, Marietta. They would crowd, they'd fill up the gym, and they'd be around the sidelines in some cases where you'd have to ask them to move back so you can take the ball out.
Summerhill itself was a beacon in the community, and it not only took in the children that came in and nested here, it also shined its lights out into the community and involved everybody who wanted to be a part of it.
If anybody fell short, like if somebody lost a job, the entire community would bring food, they would bring clothes, whatever was needed.
Everybody's children was everybody's children. All the people that lived on the hill and around in this area, if you got in trouble and they called your parent and told them that you were doing something you didn't have any business doing, they gave you a whooping.
The church played a big part in the community. You went to church and you learned morals, the 10 Commandments, and you tried to abide by those 10 Commandments.
My mom started me out very early with not only me, but all of her children to participating in church activities. It's been a strong part of my life.
The African American church was a source of hope and inspiration to people in the community. And they always looked to the future with a rather bright and positive attitude. It's not just the caring and sharing and a sense of service that we learned at Summerhill. My teachers usually thought that people were basically good rather than basically bad. They thought that the schools had a role in improving the quality of life of citizens. They saw a need for change rather than just adhering to tradition. And most importantly, even in the throes of segregation and oppression, they looked at the future with hope rather than with fear.
When I grew up, I played with white boys and girls because the white lived in our neighborhood. And I played with white girls and white boys, and when we got a certain age, we just weaned off from one another, The girls, you know what I'm saying. But the boys, we still played with the boys. We used to go to the creek. See, we couldn't go to no swimming pool because we weren't allowed to go.
A black person could not walk with a cane unless that person had some visible disability. A black person could not wear a top hat downtown. These were black codes, believe me or not, because as a youngster, my parents sat down and said, you cannot do this, you cannot do this. If a black person walked down the sidewalk, they were expected to bow to a white person they met, or take off their hat to a white man. Because when you live in a society where prejudice is important, then some of the most ridiculous things can become customs, traditions, and then laws.
The only place we had for the bathroom was the depot and the bus station. And that's the only place you get a drink of water. It's funny now, but it wasn't funny to us then because we just didn't understand.
The thing that sticks in my mind most of all is as a youngster, I was in the Cub Scouts. My dad worked with the Boy Scout troop. And there had just opened here in Atlanta a place called Storyland. And it was where kids would go And it was sort of like the forerunner to Six Flags. And my dad and several other men drove us down here to Atlanta. I was the first to spring out of the car and ran up to the little counter and put my money down, and my dad, followed with other kids. And when I put my money on the counter, the woman pushed it back out on the ground and said, "We don't let any niggers in here." And for 8 years old, that was the first time that kind of thing had happened to me. And I turned to my dad, and just being a kid, I wanted him to hit somebody or do something. And the woman, in a very firm voice, she said, "You should have known we weren't gonna let any niggers in here." And so then I looked at my dad, and surely you're gonna have to hit somebody now. You're gonna have to right this wrong. And my dad said, "Where you kids come on?" And I was arguing with my dad, "Where you going in here?" And my dad said, "Don't cause any problems, just come on." And so when we got in the car and we drove back to Cartersville, my dad said absolutely nothing. Nothing. As a father, he could do nothing to protect his son and all of my friends from that type of an insult. That taught me something about the kind of strength my father had to have, and a lot of men in my community had to have to deal with what was a day-to-day problem for African American men and women. I don't want to leave the impression that whites were evil and mean. Sometimes a system will cause you to lower your standard of decency. And for all too many people, they were willing to give in to a system that they knew was wrong.
I look back at families from the beginnings of, the Bible history, and it seems that sometimes oppressions cause us to do better or seek more. My mother had a saying, said, "I always wanted my children to be able to get on my shoulder and reach just a little bit farther."
We've seen people go into every area you could think about, carrying the message. We've had doctors, we've had pastors, preachers, we've certainly had educators, we've had people from all walks of life to go out and make a difference, and to come back sometime and make the difference. I'm proud of us.
They knew what the times were better than we did, the teachers did, because they was going through a thing too, you see. And so, but they was trying to help prepare us to get through those times.
What I'd like youngsters to get out of what went on in this community of Cartersville, Summerhill, and the entire Bartow County community is that you can be poor, you can be African American, and you can be other minorities, but you don't have to just think that there's no hope for you. There's hope. You must study, you must get your lesson, and you can be successful. There will always be injustices in this world, but it's your attitude that determines what your altitude would be.
This is what we got all the way through high school. You are somebody. You got to have that old intestinal fortitude, that old stickability, that old bulldog tenacity. We heard this every Friday God sent. So this is just resting in us.
I'd say we are roughly 39 years past officially sanctioned slavery, discrimination, and insegregation. That period lasted 390 years. You cannot change in 39 years what it took 390 years to create.
Integration like to run him crazy. He would sit up there on that porch and say, He just couldn't understand how black folks and white folks should mix. And I guess it took a lot of folks a long time to get there. And it's still like that. A lot of folks still like that, but we have to accept what they have.
At integration point, that was a deep concern. Then, is this school really ours now? There was no longer any Summerhill Blue Devils. It was the Cartersville High School Purple Hurricanes. You know, we had to lose our identity as a school to take on the identity of the Cartersville Purple Hurricanes. Now, I'm a Purple Hurricane to my heart right now, but I still miss the Summerhill Blue Devils. We may have had old books. We may have had old uniforms. We may have had second quality building, but we had the best. We had the best teachers. We had the best administration. We had the best community.
To make this a better world, we need to try to love one another. Get rid of some of this hate and envy and love one another and be thankful of what we have.
Everybody makes his own decision about how you're going to treat this friend or this person that's your next door neighbor, and deciding who is your neighbor. I think it behooves us all to try to make an impact on somebody. Each one, try to help one if you can. Help them if you can.
Hopefully we can get this message to the world, because this is the only thing that's missing in the world. It's some little simple respect and simple love, you know. And if we can teach every person to know that they are somebody special, they are made in the image of God, and nobody in the world can stop you from getting what's yours but wow you. If you spend all your time working with you, there's nothing wrong with the rest of the world. Nothing. So hopefully, you know, we can get this message to the world, and you might be the key.